Experiences of rationing are among the most shared memories of the wartime generation. It was one of the most impactful consequences of the war on the civilian population alongside air raids. Rationing affected everyone. Just ask your grandparents. Mine certainly loved to dig out their old ration books and tell vivid stories of scrimping and saving to make household products last longer and go further. Rationing was not adopted lightly and not without prior planning. The British government used the example of food shortages in the First World War to build the foundation blocks for food control in the Second. There was no rationing in the First World War, but submarine warfare caused a rise in food prices, frantic queuing, and industrial unrest in 1917 and 1918. Therefore, food planners in 1939 had to learn from the lessons of the First World War in order to establish a proper food control policy. The Ministry of Food took control of all food products in the country, including imports and the produce leaving farms. The country was then carved up into 19 large divisions, whilst local authorities also worked in cooperation with some 1,400 local food control committees. The government was therefore reliant upon this network of national and local committees to be supportive and well organised. Ration books were issued in October 1939 in preparation for the system's introduction on the 8th of January 1940. Rationing, in combination with subsidies and price controls, promoted greater social equality because the consumption of food became more equal in quantity and variation. While the black market did create a bit of an imbalance, official policy was for the fair share of food. The system relied on local food suppliers being honest in Britain's towns and villages. Egham's greengrocer and butcher would have become very important people in the local area because they were the ones doling out rations.
Well, you had to register grocers, greengrocers, and in Egham at the time there was Mr. Hussey was the greengrocer, and also a grocer. There was Budgeons and Bungards, Darvilles, Davy Griggs.
I knew my mother would go out every day and go round the shops to see what was on offer, and it was almost a joke that if you were in a bus and you went along and you saw a queue, you got off the bus and got to the end of the queue just in case there was something available.
There were three parts to this scheme. The first was an individual flat rate ration, and the second required the consumer to register with a retailer in order to ensure the fair division of the first part. And lastly, the acquisition of sufficient supplies and effective distribution required complete control by the government. Could you tell me a little bit about what you remember of rationing in the local area?
Well, I was living in Weybridge. I don't remember an awful lot about rationing. My mother ran a small private residential hotel, and the guests, who were mostly permanent, would hand in their ration books to my mother. And I remember on a Saturday at the kitchen table when the rations came in, because she didn't get anything extra being a hotel. And weighing out, she bought each resident their own butter dish and jam dish, sugar dish I should say, and sitting at the table with scales, weighing out the rations that the residents could have on their table, like the butter and margarine for their bread and butter toast and things, and what she had to keep back for cooking.
Allowances were made for some who needed the vital healthy vitamins from fresh and altered produce. Pregnant women and nursing mothers were entitled to an additional allowance. Children and the elderly were also granted additional rations. The Ministry of Food recognised the importance of a healthy, well-fed industrial workforce because this would be good for morale, so they were also granted extra rations.
And I think the rationing was 2 ounces of butter a week, 1 egg, but anybody that was pregnant had 3 eggs. I can't remember about the milk. Potatoes you had to queue for. I think it was about 2 ounces of meat a week. And if you were lucky, you got some offal. But the word would go round and there'd be a massive queue, because I can remember my mum going up and queuing. You had to queue for everything.
Were there long queues?
Oh yes, right there down the high street. That was for food. But most people grew their own veg. My father dug up his flower garden. We had apple trees and fruit bushes.
All manner of food items, household products and clothing were rationed. For example, this tin of dried eggs. These were imported from America in 1942 as a response to the shortage of fresh eggs in Britain.
I liked it. We used to make omelettes out of it, or scrambled egg. And if you could get your fruit, some people had hoarded it, you could make a cake. But I really did like dried egg.
This black and gold tin is basic and a little bit battered. The word that really jumps out at you is the word eggs. The government was obviously very keen for the public not to be put off by the concept of dried powder. The accompanying description of the contents as pure and whole really enforces this idea. A modern day analogy would be to think about how much emphasis today's manufacturers put on their products containing 100% British, organic or whole grain ingredients, even if they are completely chocolatey or fatty products. In Egham, the effects of rationing were no different to anywhere else. Reminiscences of contemporary female students here at Royal Holloway College were preoccupied with the shortage of food. One female, named Gillian Harris, a student here from 1940 to 1943, remembered how every meeting in the main lecture theatre degenerated into a discussion of the shortage of food. Another remembered the strict ration of bread, butter, milk, sugar and tea, all an important part of their morning routine. Once these were used up, no more was provided until the next batch, so the girls had to learn to conserve and make do. It was entirely your fault if you had to go without. This was a lesson one poor girl learnt the hard way. Groundsman Bert Seeley remembered how each girl was given a jar of marmalade at the start of the month, and on one occasion, one poor girl dropped hers on the first day. Efforts were made across Britain to try and help maintain the food supply and use everyday items to the country's advantage. In the Egham and Staines News in 1941, under the tagline "Save your way to victory," residents were encouraged to place used stamps into a stamp saving book. This was part of a government scheme to try and raise money from the public to help with the financial deficit caused by the war, but without raising tax revenues. Land girls became the icons of home front campaigns, promoting hard work in the fields to ensure the longevity of Britain's food supply. With many thousands of men being drafted into the British Army, farmers and the government were desperate to fill those land worker vacancies. This is where land girls came to the rescue. Wartime images of women wearing green jerseys, brown corduroy breeches and slouch hats are iconic, toiling the fields so Britain could eat. By the spring of 1941, the land girls of Surrey were well established in forestry and agriculture right across the county, their pre-war lives long forgotten. One girl lived in an army girls' hostel in Queen's Road, Hersham, near Weybridge, while working for farmers in Esher and Walton, before finally moving on to Thorpe Park Farm near Staines. There, she planted tomatoes, milked cows, and took part in haymaking from dawn until dusk. Another girl, named Bess Pendry, was posted from Croydon to a tree surgeon's in Chertsey, named George Crawley and Sons. Female students here at Royal Holloway College were always keen to do their bit alongside their academic studies. Gillian Harris, who we've already met, remembered how there were various opportunities for students to take part in outside of term time. For example, there was a Digging for Victory campaign on campus during the Easter holidays. A large potato patch was dug just opposite the entrance to the South Quad. You can see how Royal Holloway was perfect for such land-based action, given its 135 acres of woodland and parkland, much of which still exists today. The college's size in both terms of its student population and geography meant it had a vital role to play in Egham's own home front efforts. Rationing continued even after the end of the war in 1945, to allow Britain's food stocks to fully replenish. It wasn't until 1954 that rationing was finally brought to an end. This was because there was still a large number of men in the armed forces helping to regain stability in post-war Europe, a badly damaged economy, and Britain's responsibility to feed those parts of the continent still under its control.